Hello, everyone. It's great to see a number of people coming out for this talk. I'm kind of inserting it a little bit into this series on portals to non-dual truth, but I think it's very relevant as well, as I kind of thought about it and reflected. So I was going to do a talk on silence as a portal, and I may still talk a little bit about that, but mostly I'm going to be talking about this whole idea of free choice or agency that was brought up last week. So it's the notion of choice. Do we have choice and agency in our lives? And this is an important question to reflect on, because all these talks I'm giving on portals to non-dual reality, I'm actually presenting a choice point to you, right? I'm saying, choose to kind of turn your attention away from the content of your experience and turn it towards that which knows experience. Right? That's really what I've been talking about, and I'm just using different portals or access points, you could say, to sensing into this knowing aspect, or this non-dual truth, this ultimate reality, because it has so many names, but this kind of our true nature, in a sense. So the invitation is to turn your attention, right, in a different direction. Therefore, it kind of necessitates a discussion about agency or free will. Like, is there a choice here that we're actually choosing to place our attention in a particular way? In the meditation, I was talking about that slight turn away from content to that silence, still knowing aspect that's already there. So again, you could call that a choice. So there's these questions. Does the little me, as I sometimes call it, or the egoic self, as I also sometimes call it, have agency to decide whether or not to, become entangled in the content of the mind body, right? Does it actually decide, well, I am or I'm not going to become entangled in the content? Does it have the choice instead to direct attention somewhere else, towards one of these portals that I've been talking about? So does the egoic self have this agency? Right? That's a big question. Something we need to reflect on and to understand, really. So the statement that you have the freedom to choose whether you believe your thoughts, right, or get entangled in them, proliferate on them. So that the statement that you have freedom to choose whether or not to believe your thoughts and get entangled in them or not is a concession to the limited little me, to the egoic self. It's kind of a compromise statement, you could say, or I like to use the word concession. So the reason, and this is going to sound philosophical, but I hope it gives you some context for why I'm giving you these kinds of teachings. The reason the statement's made is that from the perspective of the separate self, right, the little me, it has choice and agency. right? The little me, by definition, is all about choice and agency. The little me has to control its environment and struggle within this environment to even be manifested. If you don't struggle with this, with the present moment, there is no little me. It cannot exist without that struggle. So by definition, the little me is believing that it has agency and choice. It's implicit in the limited egoic self. Implicit in the egoic self is the view that it has freedom to choose. Does that make sense to people? You see what I'm saying there? They're inexplicably tied together. This notion of choice and the limited egoic separate self. So for the separate self to say that it does not have choice is actually a contradiction. It just can't say that. By definition, it must feel that it has choice, right? In order to struggle with things as they are, in order to struggle with the present moment, it has to have choice. I'm going to struggle, I'm going to grasp for this because I like it. I'm going to push this away because I don't. So I can choose all these things that I can control in my environment to be happy. So by definition, it must feel that it has choice. And therefore, because of this, the teaching is, okay, you feel that you have choice, then choose to disentangle yourself from the content of your experience and instead choose to align yourself with truth, to turn your attention towards that knowing capacity, that knowing, that still aware knowing capacity, right? So you see what's going on here is it's a statement, a concession to the separate self. Okay, you feel you have choice, then choose this. The blue pill or the red pill. Choose to turn your attention towards truth, as opposed to the being entangled with thoughts and other aspects of your experience. Yeah, and actually see that this limited self that believes it has choice is actually the cause of suffering. That's what the Buddha was pointing out in the Four Noble Truths. The struggle, this desire and clinging, pushing away. It's what causes suffering. And that you can disentangle yourself from all this. There's a path to the end of suffering. And when you disentangle yourself from it, you, by definition, align yourself with truth. You go through one of the portals and you know your true nature. Yeah. So when the separate self extradites itself, that's, I think, a word, eh? Extradites itself from the belief in separation, it becomes clear that there was never a separate self to begin with. And therefore, the question of whether or not the separate self has choice becomes meaningless. So you eventually see that there is no separate self. When you I was going to say go through the portal. It's not quite like going through a portal, taking the metaphor too far. But when you um, awaken to truth, to your true nature, to non-dual reality, you see that it becomes clear that there is no separate self. Everything's interconnected and mutually co-arising, codependent, dependent. Therefore, the whole question of choice becomes meaningless. But first, it must be seen, right? For that realization to occur. So the realization that the notion of a self and the self of choice as being meaningless occurs as one awakens to truth. So it's not helpful for me to just say to you that no, you don't have free will is an illusion. Because actually what that does is it creates a trap for us. It's where we believe, so there's a separate self that then has adopted a belief that it doesn't have choice. So you're combining two kinds of things, a perspective of a non-dual perspective being adopted by a separate self, which really doesn't get us anywhere. I mean, a separate self can go around spewing all the non-dual stuff that it wants, A separate self that kind of adopts that no choice, no free will perspective is the separate self that just says, yeah, well, nothing really matters. I don't have any choice and everything's just happening anyway. It's kind of a nihilistic, kind of glum view, I might as well just party hard rather than go to Sangha, right? And that's kind of so I really try to avoid kind of putting out non-dual statements as, truths, or something to be believed by a separate self. You're mixing beliefs, turning what I want you to discover through your experience. I would be turning it into a belief, which then can be adopted by a separate self. As I said, it results in kind of a nihilistic, kind of depressing view of life for the separate self. You certainly wouldn't be here at a Zoom Sangha, a Zoom meditation group. So if we think we're a separate self, we really need to be honest. We think we're making choices. It's fine. We need to just be honest about that. Yeah, okay. I really do have this deep belief that there's something here that has agency. It's choosing. Be really honest about that. And so then your first choice, or your ultimate choice, highest choice, is to see truth and align yourself with it. That becomes your kind of primary choice. To align yourself, to turn away from the objects, of your experience, instead turn toward the silence. It's always there. To consider the portals that I've been talking about as places to direct your attention. Attention is very important. I mean, that's why I call the website for this group, pay attention. Seems like a strange title for a meditation group, payattention.ca, but attention is so important, and where we put our attention is so important. And that choice that you can make as a separate self is to place your attention on one of these portals or access points to truth, as opposed to being carried away and dazzled by all the objects of your experience, thoughts, emotions, sounds, taste, smells. I mean, those will all still occur. They'll still arise. Your sense organs will still pick them up, but we're just not entangled in them. The word the Buddha used a lot was the translation is entangled. Like in a knot. We just get ourselves in a knot, being entangled in the content of our experience. So we always have this choice where to place our attention. Krishnamurti, I don't know if people have heard of Krishnamurti, an interesting guy. You can watch some of his videos on YouTube. He's I forget when he died, but quite a while ago. He was one of the early teachers, an Indian teacher. He was supposed to be the leader of I can't remember the name of the group, but from birth kind of thing. And he really instead kind of went on his own path and taught in a very interesting way. And he also has some books, and one book, and for years I wondered what this title of this book meant. And the title is The First and Last Freedom. Isn't that an interesting title for a book? The First and Last Freedom. Now, I don't necessarily recommend the book, but the title is very telling. It's really pointing to this notion of the limited self having this freedom to choose. And this is your first choice. Your first freedom is to choose to turn your attention in this way. It's also your last, because once you've turned your attention this way and seen truth, there's no longer a separate self that has the freedom to choose anything, because this separate self is seen through. So it's the first and last choice, primary choice, I guess you could call it the highest choice. And to make this choice allows us to unveil the truth of our essential nature. And when we unveil the truth of our essential nature, we then see we see no self. And by extension, we see no self with choice. They're all very so much connected. Because when we see oneness, our interdependent nature, we see that there's no separate self that's, running around making choices. Now, if we instead, we don't make this choice, and instead and this is a choice that I should say that happens moment by moment. It's not something like you choose, you say, okay, I've chosen to, and then it's like a moment by moment choice that's being made. Like every moment you're at that choice point. You're going to kind of be entangled in all this. It happens, right? The mind starts whipping up a story, right? Does that happen to anybody out there? Some event that happened, I don't know, even last year, and all of a sudden your mind's whipping up a story about it. Does that happen to folks? Or do I have the only mind that does that? Yeah. Okay, there's a few others. So the mind whips up a story. At that moment, there's like a choice. Do I get entangled in this, or just notice it and instead direct my attention to the stillness that's behind all that noise? It's that choice, and then the next moment, more content, and at some point, there's no longer a choosing to be necessary. You just dwell. There's more of a dwelling or abiding in the stillness. It's for many people. There's that's still that ongoing choice. So we can, if we choose to become entangled in the content, we're actually kind of giving consent to the illusion of a separate self, right? Saying, okay, I'm going to live the illusion, right, for a little bit here. You've given that, there's been a choice to kind of dwell in the illusory world, which we may choose quite often. And we live in a way that's consistent with that consent. Our lives follow the trajectory of that choice to be entangled in the content. In other words, we will suffer. We will experience the pleasures of life and the pains of life. We'll grasp at the pleasures and we'll push away the pains. And of course, all that results in a lot of extra suffering. And this is the territory of believing that you're a separate self. We've all experienced it or are experiencing it. That's the territory, right? And many people will live that in that territory their entire lives and see no or have no reason to, or have not been, the teachings have not come their way. And that's just how their lives unfold. But we have this first and last freedom. All separate selves have this first and last freedom to direct our attention to the still, silent awareness that's always and already present in the background of all that noise or movement, whatever we want to call it. And that movement will continue, but it'll be continuing in a completely different way. So that's how I kind of look at the notion of choice within the context of the teachings that I've been offering. I've talked about choice in the context of life in other talks. Those kind of choice points, and how if you in each moment, again, this choice is occurring. If you choose to, rather than be entangled in the content in any one moment, it's almost like stepping back, right? It can feel like almost becoming the witness to what's arising. People ever get that sense where all of a sudden you're in a situation and your practice has brought you to a point where there's maybe some conflict, interpersonal conflict, and rather than getting kind of sucked into it, you just kind of step back and kind of watch what's arising in the body and in the mind. And this is what mindfulness is really teaching us, basic mindfulness. And in that moment of allowing the moment to unfold, of course, all kinds of other options on how to respond become available. This is the whole, responding versus reacting in life teaching comes in. When you're just being pulled around by thoughts and emotions and experience, by the content of your life, you're just reacting. And it's almost like you're on autopilot. There's very little choice in that. You may think you're choosing things, but really you're just being pulled around. But there can be, again, I always put it this way: when you step out of that entanglement, other options just kind of arise into the space. And I won't say that you actually choose one of those options. In a relative sense, I guess you do, but in an ultimate sense, an option just kind of arises as the spontaneous or obvious choice. It can feel like you're making the choice, right? But if you knew all the causes and conditions that came to that precise moment, you would see that it's actually dependent on so many other things other than the notion of a separate self choosing it. So that's how you can kind of think of this in daily life, that they're responding versus reacting by not being entangled in the content. And that's more at a kind of basic mindfulness level that I give that teaching. In fact, I did a series with the Boomerang group, which is really introductory stuff, a whole series on responding versus reacting. And that was the one thing that the group really honed in on and found interesting in all the different things that I spoke about, because people would like to respond with wisdom rather than being in a reactive state. So I think I'll probably have to leave silence as another portal or way of connecting with the awareness that knows experience to next week. That the talk on silence, it really becomes almost the whole talk becomes a meditation because it's just continually inviting you to redirect your attention. Like you can do it now. You can choose right now to redirect your attention. It doesn't mean you lose contact with the world. In fact, the world becomes more alive and more vivid. So you're still very intimately connected with life, but life as it actually is, the reality of life unfolding, rather than this kind of constructed illusory notion of a separate entity called me controlling and navigating the world. So yeah, I'll see how the talk on silence unfolds in terms of my ideas. I always kind of write little notes just to so I remember, but what I'm talking about. And yeah, we'll see where it goes, but that might be a direction for next week. Unless somebody might ask a question like they did last week, and we could go in a completely different direction. So that's fine too. The questions are very helpful for all of us. So yeah, I'll open it up to any questions or comments about this talk, about anything else that's coming up in your practice? Anita.
Just wanted to share a thought that kept sort of passing through my mind as tonight through your talk, which thank you for this, by the way. It's a very difficult topic. I thought you were masterful in your navigation of it, and because it's a tough one conceptually. The thing that I found helpful was I was constantly coming back to the fact that the egoic, or the little me, or the egoic self, cannot grasp this. So forget it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's because I guess I have a technical and analytical mind training from so I approach life from a kind of, when I'm trying to figure something out, I do the problem solving, the scientific method, the very analytical, linear kind of thinking. And I catch myself, or at least the reflex now, because you've said so many times, and tonight as well, and in the past, we cannot grasp this with the egoic mind. So once, as we inevitably go down that path, come back, and you talked about portals, and something that occurred to me tonight, which would take some exploring perhaps, but it was that there's an inner knowing. We all have an inner knowing, or an intuition, or a sense for the egoic mind. Fears what it fears, wants what it wants. It's all about survival and protecting us and doing all the stuff it thinks is the best thing for us, but it's often wrong. And yet we know this is, I think, what navigates us towards what's good for us, turning towards meditation and so on. I think it's somewhat tapping into what we really do know to be good for us, or to whatever, it's where the end of suffering is, or the alleviation of suffering. So those are some concepts that occurred to me. First of all, turn off the thinking, the analytical approach, and also tapping into that sense of knowing where alleviation of suffering is, which perhaps, to my mind anyway, my egoic self mind, is perhaps a portal to that, whatever, not self, kind of, I don't know. Anyway, some thoughts to share.
Yeah. Don't know mind is another portal we could actually explore. It's a very important one. Letting go of, the notion that as a limited separate self, know anything. Yeah. You said something else that struck me, and it's left, but maybe it'll come back. Yeah. So the separate self, I think the reason that the portals I find it helpful and effective is the separate self can go, okay, I can choose to direct my attention in this way. So it's giving the separate self something to do, but it's not like a technique. Because when the separate self grabs onto a technique, like, I'm going to do this kind of meditation and it's going to help reduce my stress, or I'm going to do this kind of meditation and it's going to increase my wellness, or it's going to make me increase my emotional intelligence. I just read a book on how to increase your emotional intelligence, meditation. It's going to make me happy. It's going to make me enlightened. So those are egoic self, projects, and they don't get us very far at all. So what I'm trying to do with the portals, and I just kind of realized this, it wasn't entirely intentional until the question got asked about choice. I'm kind of giving the separate self a simple choice. So there, it feels like it's doing something, but it's so simple. It's just all the choice is just turning attention this away from this toward this. That's it. That's the only kind of and then when I saw the Christian, I remember the Krishnamurti book, I thought that's what he was talking about. The first and last freedom is that choice of the at least I think that's what he was saying. Maybe he was saying something completely different. I don't really know, but because I didn't go back and read the book, I must admit. But the title title spoke directly to what was coming up for me. Yeah, so it does give the this separate self something, a choice point, moment by moment as well, a moment by moment choice point. It's not like a choice to say, okay, I am going to choose from now on to, I mean, you can say that to yourself, but it's not going to happen, right? Because you're going to get entangled. That it happens. Yeah, that's another way to look at it. But yeah, don't know mind as another portal, because perhaps it might be an additional. We have talked about it numerous times, but talking about it as a portal kind of shifts the way it is looked at.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Really good to see everyone. Always have to say that because it's so true. Couple things came up for me. It was just when I was listening, Anita, to you talking about being that's following the scientific method, and like science, they have it half right. They think that our thoughts are, our thoughts, they think the brain is the mind, which is kind of silly because they think the material is the source of the immaterial, which is the thoughts. But you need the immaterial in order to tell there is a brain. So it's like they only take one half of the story, and it's like it seems so obvious that there's this whole other half, but they're just too grouchy or something to want to look at that. So I think that's funny with the scientific method, because it is very nihilistic to think that there's nothing to life besides like material. It's and that's the basis. It doesn't even make any sense, really, if you even think about it for like a minute. Anyhow, I think that as well, I was going to say one thing that I found, Stephen, useful when first noticing that, to first really getting a taste for what attachment felt like, was the concept of feeling tone. So unpleasant or pleasant. And I mean, I was taught that in MBSR teacher training stuff, and I never really, didn't really, I came to know it more deeply than just like kind of a surface, like, oh yeah, that's unpleasant, pleasant. It's actually the root of so you have a thought like, oh, I realize that something came into my perception, but now you're starting to add this feeling tone onto it. And that was like the beginning of the cascade of thoughts, of that attachment. And when I first noticed that, I think that was a real insight for me, to notice that, yeah, really, it is all about attachment. It's all of it, everything, all the suffering. There's nothing else. It's just about attachment. And just noticing that, I think, was a big insight for me. And yeah, I was thinking too that what was coming up for me when you're talking about the separate self, it's only has freedom to direct attention into the stillness. Another way I thought of saying that was really the only choice it has is to notice the choicelessness. Stillness is choicelessness. I mean, it's and then you can look even deeper than that. So that's maybe that's a good way of evoking that unknowing, or that not knowing mind. The only choice we have is to notice the choicelessness. I find like that kind of, when you throw those opposites in, like choice and choicelessness, the ego gets kind of confused. It doesn't know what to do. It's like it's trying to find a middle way, but the middle way is like it's choicelessness, really, when you go underneath. And so yeah, I found that useful too in my meditations when I notice thinking, just to say, well, not thinking. And then the mind, that little mind gets confused. Like it's like it doesn't know how to resolve those two opposites. So I found that useful too.
Yeah, it reminded me of those Zen koans. People are familiar with Zen koans, like what is the sound of one hand clapping and so on. And they're just meant to exhaust the conceptual mind. So that the Zen teacher would give a student a Zen koan, like, what is the sound of one hand clapping? Go and contemplate that and come back and tell me the answer. And they come back and with the answer, and the Zen master rings the bell and tells them, to go away and do it some more. And they do this for, days and days on end. And eventually, it's meant to kind of exhaust that that mind that thinks it knows, right? Which Anita was pointing at, about till it gets to the not knowing, the place of not knowing. And then, of course, that's where the answers lie. But that's, just what you said reminded me of, the Zen koan, which are kind of fun. The answers, a lot of the answers aren't online either. I'm surprised that they're not all online at this point. Somehow the Zen masters have kept their stuff off the internet, a lot of it anyway. So because if everybody can just go online, then you'd have all the Zen students, hiding around the corner on their phones. Oh, there's the answer, running in right away. Of course, the Zen teacher would pick up on that pretty quick. Yeah, Zen koans are fun. Something we could explore that down the road as well, as a way of accessing truth, non-dual truth.
Could I just add something, Stephen? Because that's the sound of one hand clapping is a great koan, but I guess my own koan that I've used probably the most is, okay, so I notice a thought and I say, well, what's a thoughtless thought? That really confused my mind. Did not know what to do. So it just kind of was like, it just kind of threw me into an open space.
Yeah.
At a certain point. It took a little while, but at first it was just kind of like, oh, this is kind of weird. And yeah, anyways, that's one I've used.
I have a question that may not, I don't know if I can make it make sense, but maybe I'll just ask. With trauma and no self, or where the lived experience of self has been trampled on by some outside oppressive force. I feel like there's this part of the healing is like patching together a little me that is functional and can still serve you in your day-to-day life when you need to have a persona. And then there's also a lot of healing that comes from letting go of a sense of that little me that was trampled on, or like just getting to a deeper place with that experience where there's a deeper just freedom that comes from letting go of that framework entirely. But I work with, like, I'm thinking of my own personal experiences and like a long journey of like being supported to use mindfulness to work through difficult mental patterns that come from the past, and also finding a lot of relief at times when all of that concept, all of the concepts of self and what happened, what didn't happen, where am I, who am I, can just be released. But I also work with many with people whose sense of self has been imposed on by outside forces. And I think before we can let go of, it's almost like a luxury to be able to let go of the self. You have to almost first have a chance to have a self. I don't know. It's just something I've wrestled with mindfulness, because there is some like this. I think of the self as just a tool that evolution that we animals have, that our brains have produced for us, and it's a tool with some practical applications. But and maybe that tool still has to be healed when it has been crushed or hurt. And then there's also that deeper realization that it is just a tool. I don't know if that made sense, but that's what was on my mind tonight.
Yeah, thank you for that. That makes total sense. It's a deep question at so many levels. For one, it's a core debate or dialogue, but it sometimes turns into a debate in Dharma teacher, mindfulness teacher circles. The notion that should we teach mindfulness as kind of this healing process where people can work through their karma, whatever that might be, their trauma, so on. Or do we, is the direct path appropriate, where we teach people the direct path to awakening, and then in that process of awakening, the karma gets kind of burnt off, right? So yeah, so there's that dialogue that's going on. I kind of take both approaches. I mean, I did a whole series on trauma, and I think all human beings carry trauma to varying degrees that's being processed, that we're living, we're reacting in the world from some trauma in our lives, all of us. It's just the way human life unfolds. So I'm of the old Buddhists kind of would say, the purification process needs to occur before we become enlightened. Sort of the Vipassana, Theravadan Buddhists would kind of go that route, whereas the Zen kind of approach is, just enlightenment. You just take the student straight to truth. And then once truth is seen, all the karma just kind of gets dissolved away. But you can do both at the same time, actually. I don't think there's a choice that has to be made between a gradual path and a sudden path. Sudden meaning, here's awakening. I think it's still even the direct path, I think, happens gradually. But anyway, that's a whole other dialogue. But so, yeah, I think you can work through karma at the same time that you're turning towards truth. You can do both at the same time. And I think that's a very healthy way to look at this process. And it is true that you can work through karma through mindfulness practices, right? You can work through anxiety issues and trauma and so on. And it is also true that when truth is seen directly and experienced directly, that all that karma does get it gets worked through very quickly. Because some of the karma can take lifetimes to work through. Awakening literally brings it all into clear seeing, and you can literally sit and see the truth of that. It's just almost like what could take years can become split seconds seeings, because you're seeing it from reality, not from the perspective of the limited self. Can you see how that makes a huge difference? You're seeing it from that from a true perspective, as opposed to perspective that's of a separate self. So but I think both are entirely appropriate, and that's why I teach both. So, sometimes when I do these kind of direct teachings, I think, is this too much for people? But I know that it can be accessed by anybody. In fact, you don't need to necessarily be suffering to see truth, but people that suffer deeply sometimes see it quite quickly. I almost think suffering is the wake-up call from truth. It's like we need it in order for the impulse to want to know truth to arise. Right? If we were all just kind of like Adam and Eve before the apple, we didn't have the capacity to know, to experience suffering. There would unlikely be an impulse for awareness to know itself, for truth to know itself. I hope I'm not losing you on that, but I think suffering plays a real role. So, I sometimes say, here's another way to come at this dialogue is, I had a teacher, Ajashanti, said to me, be careful about relieving people's suffering, because that suffering could be their portal to awakening. That just blew me away. I froze, and I thought, yeah, but I don't know. But I still teach in both ways. There's a very much more experienced and very deep teacher saying, be careful. He didn't say don't. He just said, be careful. Yeah. So yeah, there's so many ways to come at this. I'm not dogmatic on any of. I don't get into debates about it. I just go, yeah, that sounds. Maybe, yeah, that sounds. Keep doing that, and somebody else will say, yeah, maybe. Do what feels right for you as a receiver of the teachings, and so I do what feels right as a one who offers the teachings. But that's a very deep question. It's yeah, just access that deeper intuition to know what feels appropriate for you as you're working your way through these teachings. You know, I've had some people leave the group who are, you know, working through deep trauma, you know, over the years. And I always reach out, and they just said, you know, I need to really work through some stuff before I can really understand what you're saying in terms of these direct teachings. Oh, that's fine. You know, that's great. And keep in touch and let me know how it goes. And so that's an option for many people. And some others, you know, they relate to the direct teachings because the spiritual impulse is strong. I don't know why, but some people, that spiritual impulse to know is, you can put it aside for a month or a year, but wham, it comes back again. So you just keep getting pulled back to that, to this, I call it an impulse, is this aspiration to know. And so some people just keep getting pulled back to that. So yeah, it's everybody's different and unique. We're all unique individuals, right? Even though we're not separate, we're all unique individuals. So that's part of the truth of human existence. So do follow your heart. This is all I could say. But yeah, thanks for that question. There's a whole series there. I spoke a little too long on that, but perhaps. Anything else on people's minds? Yeah, Jason.
I just wanted to say, because I'm kind of working that same field, Anna, and I do feel like in the kind of psychotherapy realms, there's more of a there's not really there's more of it, like the idea of like the direct teachings, like immersing someone quickly in that is I feel like it's not it just isn't like talked about that much. I find it's more the indirect approach, like just focusing on doing the mindfulness. And I you know, I've been wondering about that right now and thinking, you know, like you said, Stephen, Adyashanti saying that, you know, don't be quick to kind of try to relieve someone's suffering. But in the therapeutic setting, that's almost anathema to say that, right? People would be maybe afraid of being reprimanded or something, or so I guess it depends on the setting. But so I'm thinking, well, why would we be afraid of you know, having people have a little bit of suffering? And I think, to me, like, if you go down to it, it comes down to like, what's our biggest fear? Most people's biggest fear is fear of dying, fear of death. And I mean, in the medical profession or in this, like, if you were to come out and say, look, you know, death is actually just an illusion as well. That would not go, probably wouldn't go over too well, but it's true. And so, yeah, I think and I really liked your question, because I think it's even more challenging, I think, in the healing professions, especially if it's a regulated profession, to make that dance of like, okay, when do I create a safe container for this person? You know, teach them self-compassion versus just giving them mindfulness so that they're able to look more closely at their suffering. And it's a challenge. I think it's a real challenge, though. And I totally agree with what you said, Stephen, about just there's like that deep intuition, and I think everyone has their own path, and they're going to be mixing there's going to be a different mix of the wisdom, / mindfulness teachings and the compassion, and everyone's going to need a little bit, everyone's going to need a slightly different ratio. That's what I feel. So thanks. That was a great, I really appreciated those comments, Anna.
Yeah. Well, our time together is coming to a close, and so I'll end it here. But thank you, everyone, for coming and for your participation. And yeah, in terms of going live, I will let you know it's coming soon. A lot of the groups are starting to meet live. Meditation groups have started in the last couple of weeks, so we'll probably join the trend and do likewise. It looks like it'll either be the ravines where we used to meet or the Shambhala Center. I just have to work out the details and actually go visit the Shambhala Center. Yeah.
Are you thinking going hybrid, Stephen?
Exactly, yeah, hybrid. Yeah. So there'll be lots of wires and cameras and gizmos. Yeah, I talked to somebody who's in a group that started up. I guess they started the Pagoda Sangha, started a couple weeks ago, and they did hybrid, and they still have quite a few people zooming in. So
Yeah, good.
yeah. And we can't possibly you want to hear. We can't just leave her out. She may be the only one on the big smart TV. But it'll still be worth it, right? Yeah, we'll all be little regular sized people. She'll be a 75-inch
On the screen, yeah.
screen.
Can't wait.
Yeah. But yeah, I think
Larger than life.
larger than life, yeah. But I'll keep you updated anyway once I explore it some more. But if you have other options too, and if you have opinions about one place or the other, let me know. Right? If travel's an issue, let me know. Okay, everyone, take care. Have a great week.
Not everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Good to see you.
Bye.
Night. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.